This is Loren DeFalco, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. And while a lot of YouTubers want you to smash the subscribe button, you don't have to be so indelicate. You could just gently click on the subscribe button and encourage your friends to do the same thing. Well, we are all in for a treat today because today's guest is a proud New Yorker, a former financial planner, current head of research at CB1 Capital, and he has one of the most interesting medical stories I've ever heard. Please welcome Loren DeFalco to the program. How you doing, Loren?
Good. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing well. I've been geeked on your appearance. There's so much I want to learn about you, but let's start, I guess, in the earlier time. Where did you grow up, Loren?
So I grew up on Long Island, Huntington, Long Island in New York, about half hour east of where I live right now.
So Huntington and Long Island, New York. What did you enjoy doing as a kid, Loren? What were some of your hobbies?
I enjoy riding bikes more than anything, and I think I still do in my later years. But that was probably my favorite thing to do.
So were you a BMXer? Did you like riding around the neighborhoods? Did you hit the mountains? What is your favorite terrain?
I think when I was in my preteen, before being a teenager, yeah, we all had those little BMX bikes. I don't know if they were real BMX, but, those little dirt bikes we'd have, and then graduated to 10-speed for a while, and then spent a year in Arizona, Phoenix area during college, and picked up mountain biking there. So I've run the gamut, but it is one of the best things to do. It's just a sense
yeah. So you're an MTBer. Any war stories? Any broken bones from that?
Yeah, I remember I was going downhill, actually here on Long Island. Thank God it wasn't that steep of a hill, but the brake snapped, and then I hit a tree full speed, and the burst sap or whatever is over here popped, and that wasn't fun. Had another time where the bike flipped over, everything flipped. Yeah, I've had a few things.
Well, we're fellow MTB Purple Hearts. During the pandemic, I took my oldest son to a mountain biking park a few hours away. I'm in California, and the trails were great. Then afterwards, we went on a skills park, and I ended up in the emergency room. I broke my proximal humerus, and two surgeries later, it's pretty much good as new. But I don't think I'm going to be zooming down the hills. I don't know if I was zooming, but I'm going to stay more conservative when it comes to my bicycle riding.
Gotcha.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way, because you're a fighter, and we're going to get into that. But so you grew up in Long Island, you enjoy mountain biking, but we met through investments, through kind of a mutual interest in that. When did you cultivate an interest in investing and helping people with their money, Loren?
Well, I think I must have been maybe 10 years old, and my father got me a Warren Buffett book. So at a very young age, I was exposed to him pretty much, but picked up other things along the way. But that's what I remember sparked my interest. Of course, growing up in the 80s, I was born in 76. So growing up in the 80s, Wall Street was going gaga. Growing up on Long Island, of course, and you see all that. And that's really what sparked my interest. I always was a fan of numbers. I always liked numbers.
So instead of the Hardy Boys, your dad gave you a book by Warren Buffett, one of the greatest value investors of all time. But I'm curious, Loren, New York in the 80s, this was like Wall Street, big cocaine, but what are your earliest memories of quote unquote Wall Street types?
Yeah, I'd have to think. It's probably what you saw on TV or in the movies, just those slick guys wearing suits, and that's my recollection. But yeah, it was all around us. Of course, living on Long Island, everyone was focused on it. Late 80s, the early 90s, the late 90s even, the tech bubble. That's when I really got into the industry, was around 98, right when the tech bubble was almost ready to pop. And that I'll never forget. I started when Arthur Anderson was going through their
with Enron. Yeah, I think they were the auditors for Enron, if I recall correctly.
Yes, and it taught me a very good lesson that you never know what's under the hood. Much as you can glean off of, the financial reporting and all the information you get from the company, you never really know what's under the hood, and that speaks to risk management and things to be aware of. There's things you can't be aware of, and that was a very good lesson.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into that a little bit. What was your first quote unquote real job in financial services?
In financial services, it came out working with Northwestern Mutual, and this was right when Glass-Steagall had come down. So everyone was doing everything, managed money, insurance, financial planning, retirement planning, college planning, anything and everything. Mutual funds, ETFs at the time weren't there. But once Glass-Steagall came down, everybody was doing everything. So it was full financial services. We had to focus more on estate planning and business planning because of the nature of New York City where I was working. That was the real focus, and I did that for about close to 7 years, I guess, a little over 7 years. And then our office was moving. There was a big transition in the company, and I ended up going to do in-house at MetLife for financial planning for their higher-end advanced financial planning across the country. I was in charge of a group of advisors. And to be honest with you, I really missed personal production, working with people, working more hand in hand with people. So went to HSBC after that and did that, and that's when the whole seizure issue happened.
Yeah, I do want to discuss that, but let for listeners out there, please describe what HSBC is and what your role was with the firm.
Yeah, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. So I was positioned at a couple of different locations on Long Island where we would just service their corporate clients and retail high net worth clients. And it was, everything from handling their 401ks at the corporate level to handling their personal accounts to asset allocation, insurance, full service planning. We did a lot of, I remember we had a lot of, I'll never forget this, the preferreds that were coming out. This was right before Lehman went down, and there was 12 to 14% coupons on Citibank, all these different banks. And Lehman had a high coupon, it was 12, 14. So there's all these different preferreds coming out, and sure enough, it was about 2 or 3 months later, Lehman went under. And I saw somebody a week or two ago post something about Citibank has some 12 or 14% preferreds, and it made me think back to, when you see those high yields, there's a reason. And then a week later, you hear about the banking issue. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
The canary in the coal mine is screaming. So people out there, if you're seeing banknotes for 12 to 14%, maybe move your money elsewhere.
We did a lot of work with auction rate securities. I remember that market froze up. That's when the money market broke the buck. That was the big thing then. So that was a time of chaos in the markets. And personally, because that's when I had this massive seizure right when I was starting at HSBC. And
so sorry to cut you off, but let's pause there. So in doing research for your parents, I learned it says you were in the airport during a business trip in 2008. What of significance happened to you that day, Loren?
So I was coming back from HSBC. I forget it was Rochester or Buffalo, but I was at LaGuardia Airport, came off the plane, and the next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance, and I had really no idea where I was or where I'd come from. I remember them asking me, and I used to fly to Atlanta a lot for Met, and I told them, I just came from Atlanta. I remember saying this. And they're like, okay, we got to take you to the hospital. I said, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going home. And I was scared. So I got out of there because, you wake up and you look around, you don't know who these people are. You don't know how you got there. And that was traumatic. And then the days after that, there's very little memory of anything. So it's just box of things that I've lost from that occurrence. And I would see a doctor and neurologist, and she did an EEG and said, "Oh, you have seizure activity. You have to take these medications, or no more driving."
Right. So I want to pause briefly. What is, you have seizure activity? Like, what does that mean in normal people terms?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I wasn't really sure myself. But when I look back, there was 2 years prior an incident where I was at my parents' house, and they come downstairs, and I was passed out in a chair. And that was a seizure. There was a constant, I'd say, every week or every other day, I can't really remember, where I get this shiver that would come from the bottom of my body up to the top, and it would just be this cool feeling, I thought. Mm-hmm. But now I realize those were little, I guess tremors. I forget what they called it, but yeah. So there was, and there's other incidents too. So at the, I never realized it, but that's what the EEG was showing, was that I was prone to have a seizure, and that's what happened at the airport, massive seizure.
So you had some history of seizures, but not enough to really notice it, because it's, right. And then you had this big one in 2008. And what sort of medical regimen were you given? So
they put me on, and I forget the name of the first seizure med was too heavy. I had to switch to another one. And that's when I remember I asked my neurologist, I said, "Well, how do you know which one I'm supposed to use?" She said, "Well, it's really what causes the least side effects." And that was a little disturbing to hear. So, as you're going along, you're getting stacked up on other things. I got stacked up on stuff to sleep. I got stacked up on can you see? Yeah, stacked up on sleep, stacked up for stuff for anxiety, stacked up for stuff to have energy. I forget what the heck it was, but they were giving me so many things. And then this is what happened. She sent me to another doctor for some other prescription. And I sat down at the doctor's office, and before I said a word to her, she was printing off, I saw them, prescriptions. And I'm like, what is going on here? She asked me a few questions, and then she started to hand me them. And I was just like, what is this? How did she know what I needed before having a conversation? So all that was, as my cognitive abilities were starting to fail, made me realize that what they were doing was not going to be a good long-term solution. And I had to figure something out.
So you're a pretty young man, about early 30s, and you realize, some of your cognitive abilities were failing, but you didn't follow the traditional medical advice. What did you do, Loren?
I did it first. No, I didn't.
Okay, but you didn't keep on it. Yeah. So I guess, when did you pivot, and what motivated you to change?
It was probably 6 months in when I realized I was looking and trying to read stuff, and I couldn't understand what I was reading. And I'm like, this can't be a good long-term, issue.
I'm no doctor, but this isn't the right path. Go ahead.
No, it keeps getting worse. And there are other people I knew who had children who were on these medications, and the stories I'd hear about them were horrible. So it wasn't unique to me. Everyone who pretty much goes on these seizure meds it's pretty harsh, most of them. So yeah, it was, the failing cognitive abilities was a big red flag, and I just knew there had to be a different answer. So yeah, and so then it was pretty depressing. I said the whole thing was very depressing, because when your body's breaking down, your mind's breaking down, it's not a good feeling.
There's not many other options after that. You lose your body, you lose your mind, little else.
And there was a friend of mine I remember who had come over to my place and brought a joint. And I remember this. I remember smoking it. And then I remember all of a sudden not feeling horrible, not feeling like I was completely depressed. So that sparked what led me to look as to why. And then I found all this other information about research being done on something called the endocannabinoid system I'd never heard of, being done in Israel, Italy, and Spain.
Yeah. What is the, I'm some familiar with it, but for those who don't, what is the endocannabinoid system?
So the endocannabinoid system is a system of receptors and enzymes in your body. And they first identified the receptors in the mid-90s, early 90s. That's CB1 and CB2 receptors. Those are the two classical receptors that we know of right now. There's others that people say should be CB3, but right now we have those two. There's other enzymes like FA and MAGL that degrade your endocannabinoids. So your body produces compounds that are almost identical to what's found in the plant in the sense that they fit into certain receptors that the phytocannabinoids happen to as well. And your body makes specific compounds for that. It's not designed for the plant. It just happens to be the plant works. So these are called endocannabinoids. And those compounds serve really to homeostatically regulate neurotransmission in the body. And this is where, you go down this rabbit hole trying to understand what does that mean? What are the implications? And it's a rabbit hole. It's a deep rabbit hole. I spent 10 years, this was 2009, I think, when I first came across this. And there wasn't that many research reports out at that time, clinical, preclinical data. So it was limited, but it's grown over the years. And all I did was everything I get my hands on, I read. And that really helped me to understand how to approach the issue I had.
Wow. So you go from financial services to becoming an expert in the endocannabinoid system because you had a personal interest in it. So your friend gave you this.
For my master's in mental health, while I had my RIA at night, because I wanted to get some air of credibility in terms of, working with cannabinoids. My background's in finance. What is this?
Right. Yeah.
I was, I think, 9 credits short of finishing because they wanted you to be in school for the last 9 credits and I said, I can't, I work during the daytime. So I literally just stopped about 9 credit shorts of my mental health master's. The idea at the time being that we could use cognitive behavioral therapy while taking cannabinoids, because what you learn is people who exercise and people who do these activities with cognitive behavioral therapy tend to benefit more from the therapy. Why is that? And what you end up finding out is all these things that they're doing, like exercising, increases that endocannabinoid tone. So, in a sense, you're giving the biochemistry, you're allowing the biochemistry to be there to change the thought patterns, to change the behaviors that you're trying to change through cognitive behavioral therapy. So that was the whole idea at the time as well. What if it was a little bit out there.
Yeah.
I didn't pursue it. I see it going on now in various places to a certain degree. But that was the thought. Hey, we could do something like this. But then GW Pharmaceuticals listed in the US, which was working on Epidiolex, which is the CBD-based drug for seizures. And then my focus radically shifted back to that, saying, oh, wow, there is an opportunity here to...
Yeah, it gave market credibility. It was something to point to. But we're curious. So your friend gave you a joint. You go in this, multi-year rabbit hole, but, how are you? How were your seizures? What came of your seizure disorder?
Yeah, I was making copious amounts of extracted oil put into cookies and brownies on a daily basis. I was eating tons of hemp food. So I remember getting what they will call auras. I had a couple of auras that were a little concerning.
Sorry, what are in this? What do you mean by auras?
Ahead of time when you're having a seizure. Not all the time, but you can. Okay. There's feelings that you'll get, and it's hard to explain. But
it's like foreshadowing of a seizure. Sounds like.
Right. Yeah, okay. And I remember having it at the airport in Canada, Buffalo, wherever it was prior. In retrospect, I realized then, oh, that's what that was. But no, I unfortunately haven't had a seizure, and And again, the seizure conditions are it's complicated because not everyone has seizures for the same reasons, right? And some people have genetic situations that aren't fixable perhaps by the same way other ones are, right? And so my seizure issue really was a factor of a totally dysregulated endocannabinoid system. That's what I came to understand. When I look back at how I was eating, the things I was eating, that was the conclusion I came to. And I listened to, there was something recently with Governor Jesse Ventura from Minnesota, where he was in front of the Minnesota state government pleading for legalization. He was telling a story about his wife who had developed seizures late in her life. I've heard this from many people. And there's a lot that points to the fact that as you don't keep this system in check or correctly fed, you will start to manifest disease, and that disease could be mental health disease or arthritis or all these different things. If the compounds aren't getting there to keep things in balance, you're going to start showing those issues.
Wow. So in essence, Loren, you cured yourself of your seizure disorder. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but I wouldn't say, I think it's more because there were comorbidities. I had a ton of comorbidities. I had arthritic pain in my knee, tremendous arthritic pain. I couldn't sleep. And those are all comorbidities of ECS dysregulation. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I got things back on track in terms of how the endocannabinoid system should be working in my body. So that was the focus. That was the diet I crafted to be able to have the system work better. And so that really, I think, is what I did more than, as people say, cure seizures. I think it was really targeting the dysregulation of my endocannabinoid system.
Okay, so you targeted the dysregulation of your endocannabinoid system. And how did your life change? Like what's your day-to-day like now?
Well, going back then, I remember when I was starting to eat the hemp food, it felt like there was a furnace turned on inside of me. Like it was the craziest feeling. Everything started to come alive again. Like I just, everything felt better. I was starting to run again. I'm starting to do things I hadn't done in a while. So yeah, it's to this day, it's been a tremendous difference because I'm, off of all my medications. I could go back years prior to that where I was misdiagnosed with having depression when it was just a lack of vitamin D that I had to
get some sunshine. That'll help your depression.
Yes, and that so I've had I had intestinal surgery along the way. I've had a lot of issues. So much healthier now, and the cannabinoids just have made a tremendous impact. I used to drink a lot of alcohol, a lot. I don't think I've had a drink maybe once in the last 3 months now, and it doesn't matter to me. I'm not trying to have them.
You don't crave it, or it's not the same.
Right. And I used to, yes, it'd be, stressful life, things going on. Oh, I need a drink.
So go ahead.
No, that's just not the case anymore. I just so my life in general, my health is much better than it was 15 years ago. So.
Yeah, like my dad always say, your health is your wealth, and he didn't originate that. It's a common saying, but you're evidence of that. So during this time, Loren, you were extracting your own product. It sounds like if someone had your condition now, or if you had it now that there's been kind of more legalization of cannabis constituents, and CBD is pretty available in most states, how would the regimen differ today versus 2008?
Well, what it really was a focus on, the data that I come across pointed to when you had too much omega-6 in your diet,
So those are the non-fish fats, correct? Like from
Yes,
beef.
yeah.
Okay.
Most people associate the omega-3 with fish, right? There's EPA, DHA, there's all kinds of omega. Gets a little nuanced, but the majority of the stuff when you have like soy or non-traditional cooking oils that,
Hydrogenated oils. Yeah.
yes. So these are corn oil, cottonseed oil, all these things are very high in omega-6. And if you don't have the proper balance of 6 and 3, your body doesn't metabolize the 3. And the 3 metabolizes, the compound that omega-3 metabolizes into is a CB2 agonist. And this is really important because CB2 is the receptor that is looked at for a lot of the anti-inflammatory effects that you get from various cannabinoids. It's the binding to that CB2 that is, indicated in all these different indications that is necessary. So CB1 is the one THC binds to, right? That's the one that most people associate with getting high and getting hungry. CB2 is the other one. And so this was the key thing that I started to understand, that if I wasn't getting a good balance, I wasn't even going to metabolize the compounds that had the anti-inflammatory effects. So in a sense, I'm constantly your body's constantly being stressed. And it has to bring itself back into homeostasis. And it does that through the endocannabinoid system predominantly. And so if you're not doing that, it just keeps getting further out of whack, right? These compounds are stored intracellularly and they're produced on demand. It's a little, there's a lot to that, but essentially, yeah, when you have them consistently at the right levels without, too much omega-6, I'll say, that then your body starts to work better is what you notice. So I know I'm meandering a bit, but it's that balance from the foods that's so important. And then there's data that points to certain probiotics helping to increase receptor density in the gut specifically. So then you start to think about the processed foods and how we destroy all the beneficial bacteria. And you look at the explosion in disease since the 20s and the 30s, as we've introduced all these vegetable oils, as we've processed the crap out of all these foods. And you see, I've looked at the charts where there's this just explosion in inflammatory related diseases. So that, coupled with a sedentary lifestyle, because if you're sitting all day, which most of us are, you're not, getting the stimulation activate the endocannabinoid system. Like the runner's high is not an opioid high. This is an endocannabinoid high. So your body needs to be active for you to produce these compounds. And when you're sedentary for a long time, eating processed foods and the wrong oils, it's very difficult to keep the system working correctly.
Yeah. So what sort of diet would you recommend for most people?
I would recommend know your farmer for one thing. It's, I have a farmer in Pennsylvania I get my stuff from that we go to visit in the summer, every summer. Many people use that we know. And I get some nice, good lean beef, some good pastured eggs, stuff like that is really good. There was some data that I had read, I came across that showed that somebody many decades ago went across all these different populations. They all had different ways of eating throughout the world. But the one common denominator in the people who were showing illness was processed food. It didn't matter so much what they ate as much as how processed was that food. So, yeah, you need the certain seafood, fish for the EPA, DHA, the good omega-3. You need to stay away from the bad oils. And that's really difficult because
and can you share what are the bad oils? Because it's not always obvious.
Yeah, anything that has a really high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. If you're not in that 3-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, you're probably going to start to cause inflammatory issues if over time, if you keep eating that way. So corn oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, all these vegetable oils. If you Google,
What are the good ones? Like, is it olive oil,
olive oil is a great
avocado?
one. Avocado is a great one. Just regular pastured butter. But yeah, for the oils, olive oil, avocado oil, or pretty cotton, coconut,
Grapeseed or
coconut,
okay.
yeah, rapeseed. That's controversial, and it's a longer topic.
Okay. Well, we'll have to have a separate episode on controversial oils.
But yeah, it's processed foods, stuff that has a longer shelf life, right? They process all these beneficial bacteria that it looks to help your gut from the animal data. And again, there's always a leap of faith into humans, but it points to these bacteria, these probiotics, increasing receptor density. So if you're increasing receptor density, and these receptors can catch these cannabinoids and deliver that therapeutic effect, is the thought.
Very interesting. So I guess, what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from this whole ordeal?
To eat right, to eat healthy and understand where your food comes from. I mean, like I was saying before, when you go out to eat, that's the hardest thing, because all these restaurants predominantly are using the cheapest oils, and the cheapest oils are generally not good for you. So it's tough. It's really tough. Yeah.
So learn to cook, know your farmers, buy stuff that doesn't last for 14 years unrefrigerated. Those are some good practical tips. And so you learned all this knowledge, and now you have a new job where I think it's pretty cool because you can apply what you learned. We don't have to go too deep into it, but please share with the audience, what you're up to now professionally.
Yeah, sure. So I founded this company with my partner Todd Harrison, CB1 Capital, about 6 years ago, and this was it's a long short hedge fund focused on the cannabinoid space. Cannabis, the cannabinoids. The idea is more for drug development, which really isn't where it should be yet. It's getting there. But yeah, I'm the director of research, and so I focus on unique opportunities, focusing on the endocannabinoid system, unique IP and stuff like that.
So I want to thank you for doing what you do. I think it's awesome, and that's kind of how we got connected. But when you are part of a fund, your job is to generate returns for your investors, your LP, kind of whoever's putting capital at risk. But you obviously have a passion for what you do. How do you kind of, I don't know if handicap's the right word, but sort of balance a desire to maybe put money towards something that you think is super cool versus something that you think has the more appropriate risk return profile?
Yeah, great question. And, we lean on like Dr. Ethan Russo on our advisory board, who ran clinical trials for GW Pharma for a number of years, Dr. Jeffrey Chen, who ran UCLA's cannabis division, who's now runs Radical Science, and Dr. Julie Holland, who ran Bellevue Psychiatry and works at MAP. So we lean on them in terms of validating the science, if this is something worth going through. And then, we look at the financials, our own, through the same lens we would with anything else. But yes, there of course is always that idea that, oh, this sounds great. And yeah, it's great to have experts in the field to lean on.
Lean on experts when you can. That's good advice. Loren, I guess in your professional or personal life, what are you most proud of that you've accomplished?
Oh, my professional life. I think I was the youngest person at my firm to ever get the CFP, which was a 2-day test. I'll never forget it. It's changed over the years. It was like 8 hours. It was enormous. So that, and I think I got in the first 2 years. I wasn't eligible to use it till my 3rd year, because you couldn't use it even if you passed. So that was not an easy accomplishment, and I was in my early 20s. So at the time, that was probably it. But I think that the work I did on my website to help people. I leave it up now and I pay for it. I don't get any benefit out of it. It's just to help people understand what I went through and how the diet affects the system. And that's THE-ECS.com. I am very proud of that because I did that all myself, that whole website. I have research links on everything in there. I haven't looked at it in years, so I'm sure some of it's a little out of date, but I keep paying for it to keep it up there to hope that other people won't suffer the way I did.
Well, thank you for keeping it up there. And Loren, what are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic that people will keep progressing on their education of the endocannabinoid system, because it affects not only your physical situation, but your mental situation. So I think as a society, we've gotten so far from where we need to be in terms of that balance of the system. And it's led to a host of issues, I think. But I think that I'm optimistic that as this education keeps coming out, more and more people will understand it and start to apply it to their own lives.
Excellent. Happy to hear that. So for people out there who want to learn more about you, maybe CB1 Capital, stuff you're into, where can we direct them, Loren?
I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and I try and post stuff when I can. If not, we have our CB1 Cap website, cb1cap.com. But yeah, LinkedIn, I think is kind of, that's how we had gotten together. And that's where I try and post what I can about, different scientific things involved with companies that we're working with when I can.
He's a great LinkedIn follow. I vouch for him. We'll include the links in the description of this episode. But Loren DeFalco, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.